In this guide, we'll be going over everything you need to know about the newest archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, ENNEACRAFT. Today we'll be discussing everything from engine ratios and tech options to matchup spreads and weaknesses, combo tips, rulings, and everything in between. By the end of this video, you will know the ins and outs of this deck and be ready to start playing it at a competitive level in both the TCG and Master Duel. What's going on YouTube? My name is JT and welcome to the first edition of my new in-depth deck guides here on the JT is Fast YouTube channel. The first deck we'll be going over is a personal favorite of mine and the most recent archetype introduced into Master Duel, ENNEACRAFT. For those who don't know me, I've been playing ENNEACRAFT in the TCG basically since it was released, and I recently took it to a couple of regionals and I actually ended up topping one and bubbling out of the other. I've done a lot of testing and have a good amount of experience with the deck, and with its recent release in Master Duel and now growing popularity in the TCG, I decided to bring you guys a full guide on just about everything that you need to know with the deck. One thing I want to mention before we get started is that this video will not include a standard deck profile for the deck, because I want to make sure that somebody can watch this video months down the line and not get confused about certain deck choices for a format that's come and gone by that point. If you're interested in my personal deck list, you can go check out my top 8 regional deck profile I did a couple weeks ago. That'll be linked down in the description below. So without further ado, let's begin the guide, starting with the ENNEACRAFT engine itself and some ideal ratios. So the ENNEACRAFT archetype is made up of 14 different cards, 5 level 1 pendulum monsters, 5 level 9 pendulum monsters, and 4 spells, and every card is typically played in some way. The cards look daunting at first with how much text is on them, but a good portion of text is shared between every monster, so they're really not that difficult to remember once you get the hang of it. All monsters are scale 0, so you don't have to worry about pendulum summoning within the engine itself, and all the level 1s are earth machines with 100 attack and 1000 defense, and all the level 9s are light machines with 3000 attack and 2500 defense. Each ENNEACRAFT monster shares the same effect in hand to reveal itself for cost and special summon any monster from hand in face down defense position. They can summon any monster, not just the monster revealed, and it doesn't even need to be another ENNEACRAFT monster, but they do still count as traditional special summons, so you can't summon any monster that specifically says it can't be special summoned, and the summons do still trigger cards that interact with special summons like Dominus Impulse and Mitsurugi Futsu. The card you summon off this effect is private knowledge, so your opponent actually doesn't get to see what you said. And lastly, the cards all lock you into only special summoning in face down defense position for the entire turn when you use this effect, meaning nothing before or after any of the ENNEACRAFTs. The rest of the monster effects on each card are unique, but they do function very similarly. They all have on-field quick effects that activate while in face-down defense position and trigger in response to a specific effect activated by your opponent. To make it easier, I'll be referring to this as its flip condition from now on. On activation of the specific flip condition, the ENNEACRAFT monster is flipped up for cost, then gains a specific effect on resolution, all in one effect. For example, Tremeria flips itself for cost in response to an opponent's effect that would special summon a monster, and if it resolves, will add an ENNEACRAFT card from deck to hand, all in the same chain. Note that all the effects trigger when your opponent activates the appropriate effect, meaning that the ENNEACRAFTs must respond directly to that effect being the most recent effect activated in the chain. For example, if your opponent activates the effect of Nightsword Serpent as Chainlink 1 and Mitsurugi Kusanagi as Chainlink 2, you can't chain the effect of Tremeria since Nightsword Serpent was not the most recent effect added to that chain. In addition, since they're all flip monsters, they all have separate effects that occur when they're flipped face up. All the level 1s and also the level 9 Otoriamar have traditional flip effects, meaning they have trigger effects that activate in the chain following when they're flipped up, either by card effect or game mechanic, whether that be by battle or you manually changing its position on your turn. Know that flip effects always occur in a separate chain from the ENNEACRAFT effects to flip themselves face up, and all of the ENNEACRAFT flip effects are mandatory trigger effects, meaning that they will always have priority in chain over optional effects. This means that they'll always be Chainlink 1 unless your opponent also has mandatory trigger effects and it's currently their turn, in which case their mandatory effects will go first, followed by yours, and then any optional triggers after that. All of the other level 9s have continuous effects that apply to the field after they're flipped face up. These effects do not activate and begin applying to the field immediately after the card is flipped face up, even mid-chain. This means that if an ENNEACRAFT monster flips itself up for cost, the continuous effect will begin applying immediately after activation, and any effects added onto that same chain will have to abide by that continuous effect. For example, one of the level 9's Pixia has the effect that after it's flipped face up, your opponent cannot target cards on either field or graveyard with card effects. This means that if the Pixia uses its trigger effect to flip itself up for cost, your opponent can't chain something like Infinite Impermanence to negate it because the continuous effect has already begun applying. Note as well that none of the monster effects on any of the ENNEACRAFT cards are actually once per turn at all. Not only does this mean that you can activate the same name on field multiple times a turn, but you can also just continuously reveal the same name in hand for the special summon so that your opponent actually won't be able to see anything that you're setting. Conversely, the pendulum effects on all the monsters are hard once per turn, and these effects are all split up the exact same between the small names and the big names. All the level 1s pay 900 life points to reveal 3 ENNEACRAFT cards from deck, and your opponent randomly picks one to add to your hand. While you do have to reveal the 3 options from deck for this effect, because the add is random, you don't actually have to reveal what your opponent picks, again giving you another leg up in the information game. All the level 9s pop a monster with less than 3,000 attack at the end of the battle phase if you have another ENNEACRAFT in your other pendulum scale. This effect rarely comes up, but it is important to know that this effect happens at the end of the battle phase, similarly to cards like Evenly Match, meaning that the battle phase will end immediately after this effect resolves. And finally, every scale, both level 1 and 9, has the continuous effect to place an EC counter on it every time a monster on either field is flipped face up. It's not just when a monster is flipped up by card effect, your scales will also get counters if a monster is flipped by battle or manual position change. And this is very, very important for the deck's primary win condition. Speaking of, the 4 ENNEACRAFT spell cards are also very important to the deck and its primary win conditions. The normal spells are all powerful consistency tools that also have grave effects that help your end board and your follow-up. Note that the normal spells all limit you to only activating 1 copy of the card per turn, but they don't limit you from activating its effects more than once per turn. Meaning that if you have multiple copies in the grave, you can actually use their grave effects multiple times in a turn. Alright, so now that we understand the general idea of how the ENNEACRAFT cards work, let's dig a little bit deeper into the specific card by card and some optimal ratios that you'll typically want to play them at. Alright, so as I said earlier, you do typically want to play every single ENNEACRAFT card in some capacity, but the ratios are ultimately dependent on the format. Since the deck's interactions are tailored to counter specific effects, some names are just better than others depending on the most popular interactions in the format, especially when it comes to the level 9s. Again, this section won't be so much of a deck profile as more of a general guideline to the ratios and uses of each card in the deck. So if you're interested in a more traditional deck profile, again, you can check out the description below where you'll find my regional topping deck profile from a couple weeks ago. And while you're down there, I'd really appreciate if you'd hit the subscribe button so you don't miss more deck guides in the future. Now let's talk some ratios. So for the level 1s, you pretty much always want to play like 2 or 3 of them just for maximum consistency. Tremeria, Alazonia, and Orgia are pretty much always played at 3 just because their effects come up in basically every single matchup. Tremeria chains to any effect that would special summon, and then non-targeting negates an opponent's monster on flip. Alazonia chains to any effect that would add a card from deck to hand, and then randomly banishes a card from your opponent's hand face up on flip. And then Orgia chains to any monster effect activated in the hand, and then non-targeting destroys a monster on your opponent's field on flip. Tremeria plays a very important role in a lot of your toughest matchups, and is also really a good card for triggering some of the level 9s that we'll talk about later. Alazonia is just kind of a solid all-around card, and it's typically the easiest one to trigger just because every single deck in the game is adding cards. And Orgia serves double duty a lot of the time as both removal and pseudo hand trap installation. In hands that open a bunch of engine, Orgia can be set before you commit to any plays, and then at any point during your combo, if you get hit by like an Ash, a Droll, an Ogre, or something like that, you can just chain the Orgia to flip itself and add something, and then you'll still get value through the hand trap. The other 2 level 1s, Ocneria and Exapastia, are a bit more niche, and thus some lists tend to drop a copy of one or both. Ocneria chains to an effect that activates in grave or banish, and then non-targeting shuffles back up to 3 cards from your opponent's grave or banished on flip. Exapastia chains to an effect that would set a card on field, and then non-targeting pops a spell or trap and summons a monster from hand in face-down defense position, all on flip. Exapastia is cool because it's actually the only card in the archetype besides one of the spells that can summon another name on your opponent's turn, allowing you to immediately summon the name that you add off of its first effect. Unfortunately, its flip condition is the most specific out of all the ENNEACRAFT names, so it's typically like the first one to get cut to 2 of all the level 1s. However, it is important to note that Exapastia responds to an effect to set any card to or that's already on the field. meaning you can chain it to cards like Book of Moon, Book of Eclipse, or even any of the ENNEACRAFT cards to set from hand, in addition to the more obvious applications like Albion, Diabellstar, and the Dracotail cards. Ogneria is a name that I chose to cut to 2 for my regional list, but I've been favoring 3 of it lately, just due to the dramatic increase in branded decks popping up recently. Ogneria is really solid into the branded matchup, specifically just being able to stop like the main phase 3 gameplay that deck kind of relies on. Maxing out on all the level 1s in addition to 3 release, which, in spoiler alert, is going to be played at 3 in every single list just because it's more consistency. But playing all of them at 3 will give you 18 starters. However, since the deck doesn't really have standard combos, you can typically shave a few of these down without sacrificing too much consistency. I'd say anywhere from like 15 to the maximum 18 starters is usually where you want to be at with this deck. The level 9s are a little bit more polarizing. Since they don't have much utility outside of their on-field effects, their use is almost entirely tied to the popularity of their flip conditions. The Torimar is the one level 9 that's played at 3 in pretty much every single list. Its flip condition is an Omni Negate for cards activated on field during your turn only. And then its flip effect, Book of Moons all of your opponent's monsters, with the monsters booked by this effect not able to change their battle positions except by card effect. Vittoria is essentially the most important ENNEACRAFT card for going second, being a non-once per turn Omni Negate and like a pseudo board shutdown all in one card. It is the only ENNEACRAFT card that can't actually flip itself on your opponent's turn, but you can bypass that effect with the effects of one of the spell cards and some other tech options that we'll go over a little bit later. Leon is my personal favorite ENNEACRAFT card and arguably the most divisive card amongst players. Its flip condition chains when your opponent activates a card or effect in response to your card or effect, and the non-targeting bounces up to 3 cards from either field when it does. On flip, its continuous effect burns for 900 damage each time a card is added to your opponent's hand by their card effect. And note that this doesn't just burn when they add from deck to hand, it's when they add from anywhere to hand. And it burns for 900 for each card added this way, which is especially useful into matchups like Branded, Dracotail, and Sky Striker. Leo, like Atori, kind of really shines going second, giving you the ability to actually break boards instead of just like stalling them out a bit. It gives you the ability to insulate the rest of your board as well, dodging interactions such as like Imperm, Cool Tune RS, and Forbidden Droplet occasionally. It has a decent amount of utility going first too as an end board piece, especially in tandem with the level 1s, because all the level 1s have mandatory flip effects, which means that if you can trigger their flip effects and your opponent has any triggers on the same chain, that would count as responding to your effects, which would then fulfill the flip condition for Leon. Ratios for this one are kind of contentious because a lot of people think that it's useless on its own, making it bad because it relies on specific other effects that your opponent has to play into in order to trigger it. But in my time playing the deck, like it's rarely ever a dead card, and more often than not, it's just game winning when it resolves, and it's going to resolve in basically every single matchup that you'll play. I personally play it at 3, but it should be in your list in some way, shape, or form. Tail flips itself in response to a card or effect that would destroy a card on either field, and then provides blanket destruction protection to your monsters and face up ENNEACRAFT spells for the rest of the turn when it does. Its continuous flip effect burns similarly to Leon, but in this case, it burns 900 each time a monster is sent to your opponent's grave. Unlike Leon, though, Tail only burns 900 each time any number of monsters are sent, not 900 for each. So an extra deck summon sending 2+ monsters to grave will still only burn for the 900. The protection effect applies to all monsters on your field for the whole turn, both ENNEACRAFT and non-ENNEACRAFT monsters, and still applies even if Tail leaves the field or is negated later in the turn after the effect is already resolved. The big ruling with Tail is that it can only respond to effects that are guaranteed to destroy when they resolve, meaning it can't respond to optional destruction effects like Sky Striker A0 or Varudris. The last part is ultimately kind of what holds people back from wanting to play Tail. A card made for destruction protection that doesn't protect you from all destruction seems kind of counterintuitive. This is really the most format dependent card in the archetype, I think. The current TCG format and likely future Master Duel formats are dominated by cards like the Fallen and the Virtuous and Phydraulis Harmonia, which is one of the reasons why I ended up choosing to play 3 of this card in my regional list. It's also a very important card to help beat one of the deck's worst matchups, which I'll go over a little bit later. It is still a very specific application, so I couldn't shame you for wanting to cut down on this one. Pixia responds to a card or effect that would target a card on your field by negating that effect and then banishing a random card from your opponent's hand face down when it does. It's a continuous effect, as we went over earlier, prevents your opponent from targeting cards on either field or grave while it's on field. Pixia is in like a similar boat to Tail, I think, in that it's pretty format dependent. There's often a lot of overlap between the two because a lot of destruction effects also target, like Fallen the Virtuous. So I personally wouldn't play both of them at 3 unless every deck in the format is targeting and destroying things a lot. However, Pixia's Floodgate effect can often be game-winning in a lot of matchups, and the deck has ways to manually flip it, even against decks that don't target your stuff. So I definitely would always run it at least 2 copies. And last but not least is Spia. This is the newest ENNEACRAFT card, and albeit it reads pretty crazy. So Spia flips in when your opponent activates a card or effect as Chainlink 3 or higher. And when it resolves, it will negate all of your opponent's effects that were activated in that chain before the Spia. And after it's flipped, it prevents your opponent from activating cards or effects in response to their own cards or effects. Both of these effects are pretty insane. Note that Spia requires your opponent to activate a card or effect as Chainlink 3 or higher, meaning that as long as Chainlink 3 is already activated in that chain, if your opponent activates anything after that, then Spia can respond to it. It does have to respond to your opponent's effects only, so you can't chain the Spia to your own Chainlink 3 or higher effect. I've seen that misconception a lot, so I just wanted to clear it up. Another common mistake I see is that Spia only negates your opponent's effects that were activated before it in the chain, meaning that if your opponent chains anything after the Spia activation, those effects will still resolve like normal. Similarly, Spia's continuous effect only prevents your opponent from chaining effect directly to their other effect, such as activating multiple trigger effects at once. For example, if your opponent activates Cool Tune Q as Chainlink 1, they wouldn't be able to activate Cool Tune Rotary's trigger effect as Chainlink 2. Furthermore, if you activate any quick effects as your own Chainlink 2 after the Q, the opponent has already passed the activation window for their trigger effects, so they wouldn't be able to use the Rotary as Chainlink 3 in that case. Spia is another card similar to Pixia, where it doesn't come up in every single matchup, but the matchups it does come up in, it's often just game-winning on its own. This one is definitely an easy 2 or 3 of for sure. The spells are a little bit more self-explanatory in terms of ratios. As I mentioned earlier, Release is a 3 of in basically every single list. It just places an ENNEACRAFT card from deck straight into the Pendulum Scale, essentially just making this card 3 extra copies of any of your searchers. The Grave effect lets you banish it from Grave except the turn it was sent there to recycle an ENNEACRAFT from your face-up extra deck back to hand, making it really, really important for also a lot of your follow-up plays. Rebirth is another key piece for all of your combos. It lets you shuffle back any number of ENNEACRAFT monster cards from hand or face-up field back to the deck to draw the same number of cards. Note that this card does say specifically ENNEACRAFT monster cards, meaning you can shuffle back your face-up pendulum scales. And then while in Grave, you can banish Rebirth when your opponent normal or special summons a monster in order to either special summon an ENNEACRAFT from hand in face-down defense position, or flip a face-down ENNEACRAFT on the field to face-up defense position. This is how you trigger stuff like Atorimar on your opponent's turn. It's also good for manually flipping Pixia and Spia to get their Floodgate effects without having to rely on your opponent triggering their flip conditions. You rarely use the summon effect from hand, but it can come up sometimes, and it is part of the card, so you should know it's there. This card is just really important, both your combo and your end board. It's not necessarily the best draw going second, since you'd rather just see more monsters, but it is pretty necessary to play 3 just to guarantee the turn 1 search. Reset places the deck's field spell from either deck or grave directly into your field zone, and then it also has like a secondary effect that allows you to negate face-up cards on the field up to the number of cards in your pendulum zones if you already have the field spell on field. That second part rarely, if ever, comes up, but it is a possibility to know about. The Grave effect then also lets you banish this card when if your opponent activates a card or effect to flip face-up ENNEACRAFT cards on your field back to face-down defense position up to the number of cards in your pendulum scales. Notably, this is not a quick effect, so you can't like chain it to the effect that your opponent's activating. You'll have to wait until the following chain to then use the resets effect as a trigger effect. Following that, the Enneapolis Field spell is the deck's primary win condition and the card that kind of makes the deck really function. It has 3 effects. First, it lets you target any number of face-up ENNEACRAFT names and bounce them to your hand once per turn. Like Rebirth, this can also bounce your pendulum scales. Next, once per turn during either player's main phase, if an ENNEACRAFT is flipped face up, you can either bounce it to hand or replace it in the pendulum scale. Like Reset as well, this isn't a quick effect, so it will trigger on the chain following when the card is flipped. And then finally, during both players' end phases, it removes all the EC counters from your scales and burns the opponent for 900 damage per counter. Like I said, this is your deck's primary win condition in most games. Because you can't attack in face-down defense position, it's kind of hard to like build a board to attack for game. You end up needing to remove 9 counters in total to burn for game in a lot of cases. That would be 8100. Which sounds like a lot, but realistically, it's achievable in 2 or 3 activations of the card just by playing the deck normally. The counters placed by the scale are also only leave the effect by the Enneapolis' effect itself. So if the field spell is removed before the end phase, the counters will stay in your pendulum scales. So you can burn for that amount at any point after reestablishing the field spell later. Reset and Enneapolis are typically not great draws on their own, even less in multiples, so ratios for these ones typically fall around playing 4 between the two, whether that be like a 3 reset, 1 Enneapolis, or a 2-2 split. I tend to lean more towards the 2-2 split with these two cards because, like I said, Enneapolis being your primary win condition, if it ever gets banished by an effect like an SP Little Knight or like Full Tune Q, you can never get it back in Engine, and winning the game just becomes infinitely more difficult from there. All right, so now that we've gone over each card and the typical ratios for each, I want to go over some strengths and weaknesses and where exactly the engine sits in the current formats. I want to get this out of the way now, though. Yes, as of right now, a lot of the deck's success comes from the fact that a majority of players do not know how to play into the deck. Most people have never read an ENNEACRAFT card in their lives, and unlike other rogue decks, they can't just pick up the cards or click them on Master Duel in order to read them once they're already on board. Luckily, that's not the only way that the deck can win. I've played plenty of games where my opponent knew exactly what my cards did, and they still lost. The ENNEACRAFT engine is very powerful in its own right, and a good pilot will always be able to put the deck in the best position to win, regardless of who their opponent is. So moving on from that, the deck generally plays very well into mid-range style decks. Cards like Leon and Atori just get a ton of value on their own, allowing you to push through low-to-the-ground end boards without going through too many resources. In addition, the deck generally plays very well into a lot of the popular hand traps. Stuff like Veiler, Imperm, Bell, Impulse, Fua, either don't have application against your plays or just are very easily countered in Engine. Ash can be like a small issue sometimes depending on the hand, but you play so many starters that often you can play through one Ash. This means the deck also has a very strong matchup into Cool Tune, which is currently the best deck in both Master Duel and the TCG. Going second, Pixia and Tail protect you from most of the Cool Tune effects. Spia helps you beat stuff like Zaylin, and Atori and Leon are just absolute blowouts against that board. Going first, prioritizing effects like Rebirth in order to flip either Atori, Spia, or Pixia, which can really hurt their ability to play, and then you can pretty easily out-resource them over the course of a few turns. Other relatively positive matchups for the deck include Branded, Draco Tail, and Radiant Typhoon. Stuff like Elf Note and Doomsy are closer to like 50-50 matchups, but they are still manageable a lot of the time. The main weaknesses of the engine are decks that either have a lot of non-targeting, non-destruction removal, or super crazy combo decks that just go really wide with their end boards with too many interactions that you can handle with just engine. Because the deck plays a majority of engine, the engine is just way too big. You don't have that much room for hand traps or non-engine in general. So basically always be prepared to face a full power end board when you're going second. Matchups like Sky Striker, Malice, Lunalight, and especially Mitsurugi can be pretty tough for this deck to handle. Mitsurugi especially is basically public enemy number 1 for ENNEACRAFT. Murakumo being a full board wipe that's exceedingly easy to chain block as Chainlink 2 allows the deck to bypass both Tail and Spia's protection, and you basically just lose your entire board to that. The deck does have a way to beat the Murakumo, but it's essentially like a 3-card setup that isn't always guaranteed. The setup for beating the Murakumo is you need Tremeria plus Tail plus Spia. The way that this ends up beating the Murakumo is that whenever they use an effect, whether it be Mitsurugi Ritual or whatever effect is going to summon the Murakumo back to the board, you chain the Tremeria to that, which then on the following turn will mean that Tremeria's flip effect will be a mandatory Chainlink 1, and then any effects that go on the chain afterwards, if they want the Murakumo to be chain blocked, they'll have to go up to Chainlink 3, which then plays as the Spia, or if they want to play around the Spia and just chain the Murakumo, they'll then play into the tail effect. In Sky Striker matchups, I think you want to prioritize accessing Pixia, Spia, and Leon. Pixia's Floodgate shuts down a lot of the Striker cards like Kagari, Widow Anchor, Shark Cannon, Lemnis Gate, and the occasional Fallen and the Virtuous. While Spia and Leon protect you from a lot of their chainable quick play spells and such. In addition to the tough deck matchups, the deck just has major issues with 3 of the most common non-engine cards you'll see pop up in a lot of formats. Those being Droll and Lockbird, Mulch Army Perulia, and Evenly Matched. The Droll issue is obvious with how much the deck searches, but honestly, it's the most manageable of the 3 of them. Orgia being able to chain to the Droll and get one last search is really good. And then if you have access to Release and the Field spell, you can get a pseudo search through Droll by using Release to put whatever name that you want to search into the pen scale and then using the Field spell to bounce it back. But Droll in a lot of hands can still kind of ruin your deck. Perulia is honestly more annoying than Droll because while you can still play and set up a decent board through Droll in a lot of cases, there's just no way to set up a board in this deck without playing heavily into Perulia. You typically just have to give them 3 or 4 draws and hope for the best. Thankfully, I guess like Perulia doesn't draw on normal sets, so you can avoid giving them a single draw by raw setting one of the level 1s. Obviously, for Master Duel players as well, Maxi, you'll have the same issue if you run into Maxi. You can also still play Droll in post side and Droll yourself after giving them 1 draw off the Perulia or Maxi, which I guess isn't too bad. But other than that, this card is very, very hard to play through. And then Evenly is by far the biggest issue for this deck. Similarly to Murakumo, it basically nukes your whole board, but even worse than the Murakumo, you don't even have a 3-card setup to beat it. Not a single ENNEACRAFT card in the archetype interacts with Evenly in any way, so you have 0 total ways to stop it from killing your whole board in Engine. The only way to beat the Evenly is unfortunately just with non-Engine. This card unfortunately does just straight up cook you. All right, so now that we've gone over some of the weaknesses with the ENNEACRAFT engine, let's see what kind of non-engine and tech options we can play to mitigate some of these weaknesses, starting with a couple of the consistency tools. Now, like I said, the deck is fairly consistent already. You do play 18 Rotas. However, the deck does really thrive the more engine you see in a turn. Otherwise, it could be kind of difficult to cover all your bases and get everything that you need to an end board. That's why a lot of consistency tools you'll see with this deck play double duty, either searching multiple names or providing an additional benefit on top of just searching. I wouldn't advise playing cards like Small World or 7th Tachyon because while they are searchers for your entire deck, they come at a cost of a -1, which is a pretty big deal for this deck. Also, typical draw spells like Pot of Prosperity and Extravagance have anti-synergy with the deck because they cut you off Revert, so those aren't really options either. The main consistency card you'll see a lot of ENNEACRAFT lists teching recently is Subspace Battle. This is a card that essentially allows you to add any 3 of the big ENNEACRAFT names to your end board for free as long as your opponent doesn't play any monsters with 3,000 or more attack. It does sound very powerful in a vacuum. I mean, it's basically just a +2 in a lot of matchups. Unfortunately, I do think that there's a lot of things holding this card back and why I'm ultimately not a fan personally. For one, it locks you out of using the effects of any of the cards that you reveal for the rest of the turn, making it exceptionally bad to draw going second. If you're adding 3 big names going to hand going second, you really want to be able to use cards like Atori, Leon, and Spia to help break your opponent's board. If you reveal them off Subspace Battle, your opponent now gets all the information that they don't have to fear playing into them and can use their interaction without triggering any of them. Another major downside is that a lot of decks just do play monsters with more than 3k attack. I mean, the deck's #1 op in Murakumo is 3,200 for God's sake. And the last thing that this deck needs is to make the Mitsu matchup even harder. On top of being another card weak into Droll, I think you just be taking a major risk playing this card unless you're 100% sure that you won't be facing any Mitsu. That being said, it's seen a bit of competitive success in regionals so far, so I mean, you can definitely make it. The only other consistency tool that I would maybe consider playing is Mimigul Maker. This card doubles as both a searcher and insulation against certain cards that require an empty field because you're giving your opponent a monster. The biggest one, of course, being evenly matched. Other cards that are hindered by giving your opponent something are like the Ashtiras, the Power Vice Dragon if you're playing like the Red Dragon Archfiend deck, and occasionally like the Elf Note cards because you can block their middle zone. Typically, the two names that you'll want to reveal off of the Mimigal Maker are going to be your Alizonia and your Tremeria. The Tremeria, because the quick effects on all the level 1s are mandatory effects to add, unless your opponent is playing ENNEACRAFT cards in their deck, they can't actually trigger their flip conditions on their turn, and you don't really care about either of these flip effects for when they if they manually flip them on their turn. So these are typically like the ones that you would probably want to reveal off the Mimigal Maker. I haven't actually gotten to test Mimigal Maker in practice myself, but I do think it has better applications than Subspace Battle. You can use it in any matchup, going first and second, and it beats evenly, which I think is more than enough reason to use it on its own. Like I said, this deck doesn't really need the additional consistency, but if you feel like you're not seeing enough games in your opening hands, then one of these two options is probably good enough. Another popular style of non-engine card you'll see in a lot of ENNEACRAFT lists are some form of Book of Moon style card, typically either Book of Eclipse, Daruma Cannon, or Soul and Luna. Eclipse and Daruma are essentially the same idea. They're really good at mass booking your opponent's board, which is good into matchups like Pooltoon and Doomsday, while also resetting any of your ENNEACRAFT names that you've already flipped in order to use their effects again. They also help you dodge cards like Forbidden Droplet and Forbidden Crown, which can otherwise kind of be an issue for the deck sometimes. Eclipse is nice because it does have utility going second, meaning that you can use it as both an end board piece and a board breaker. Unfortunately, the deck's lack of board breaking ability itself means that you can't really clear the cards that you book down, and letting your opponent draw multiple cards in the end phase while then keeping their board established really holds this card back, in my opinion. Daruma Cannon doesn't suffer from that downside, but it does unfortunately suffer from being purple. Being a trap card in a format where spell and trap removal is basically present in every single end board is not very good for this card, especially going second. For this reason, I personally just wouldn't main deck it, but it is a very solid option for going first post side. Definitely better than Eclipse in that case. Soul and Luna, however, is easily my favorite option of the three. It's not as widespread of an interruption as Daruma and Eclipse because it's just 1-for-1, but it's infinitely more versatile and just as, if not more impactful than these two. Soul and Luna not only gives you the option to reset your flipped ENNEACRAFTs and disrupt your opponent just like the other two do, but with the added utility of also being able to flip your face down ENNEACRAFTs face up whenever you want. As we already saw with Rebirth, the ability to flip your ENNEACRAFT names without having to rely on your opponent to trigger their flip conditions is a massive advantage for the deck, giving you another way to flip things like a Torimar on your opponent's turn or access Pixia and Spia's Floodgate effects at any point. Very, very good applications for the deck. It's also very solid for playing into boards, allowing you to force interaction from your opponent, which can then play into cards like Atori and Leon, and then it can also beat things like Droplet and Crown. It's a super underrated card. I would definitely give this one a shot. In addition to non-engine going second, a lot of lists will often also main deck at least one additional going first win condition card. These are cards that can circumvent a lot of the issues with the engine and often just win games on their own. And with Rebirth typically drawing 3 to 4 cards per turn, you're able to dig for these cards fairly easily. So what do you typically want to do when your deck needs an added win condition that can steal games on its own? Well, as a wise man once said, you play Floodgates. Vanity's Fiend and Ruler are typically the most common, I think, Floodgate style win condition cards you'll see in ENNEACRAFT. Just because they're super easy. Like, this deck doesn't need its normal summon, so you can often just slap these on the board at the end of your combo, back it up with something like a Pixia or a Tail, and just steal wins from there. If you ever want to cook Mitsurugi, this is an easy way to do that. Another option similar to the Vanities cards that could be good in certain formats is actually the Wicked Avatar. This is a little bit more of a steeper investment because it requires 3 tributes, but it completely shuts down decks like Sky Striker and Mitsurugi, which may give it a spot in the deck for some. It also can't be countered by Droplet and Crown, unlike the Vanities cards, which also gives it additional value, especially into those two matches. The last normal summonable Floodgate option that I've seen some people try is actually a small package focusing around Condemned Witch. This card is pretty cool because it doesn't require a tribute, unlike the other options. and it also searches either Droplet or Crown on summon, while then summoning the Barrier Statue of the Heavens on your opponent's turn for the Floodgate. This actually gives it some utility going second as well, because you can search a Board Breaker, so it's not really that terrible of a draw going second, unlike the other ones. The main drawback with this one is that the Witch itself is susceptible to cards like Ash Blossom and Dominus Impulse, and it also requires a few more cards to work, which can cut into your consistency a little bit. Definitely only play this one if you just don't fear God and believe that your opponent will never have Ash. Another popular card that you'll see in a lot of the ENNEACRAFT lists are everybody's favorite, the Dimension Floodgates. Since the deck doesn't really need its graveyard to play, these cards seem to just fit right at home. But I'm going to tell you right now, do not play Shifter and Macro in this deck. These cards are probably the biggest new player traps that I see for people that are trying to get into the deck. Because at face value, yes, they do floodgate the opponent more than you most of the time. However, you have to remember that ENNEACRAFT is a control deck at the end of the day. It's not aiming to prevent your opponent from playing with the intention to OTK on the following turn. You're aiming to control the board and card advantage over the course of several turns with this deck. A major factor in doing so is having access to the grave effects of the spells, especially Release and Revert. While you technically don't need them to win, they are really important to pushing your win condition, so you really want to have them. Shifter specifically is completely antithetical to the way that the deck wants to play, especially when you're going second. Like, cool, you've activated Shifter and stopped your opponent from making their turn one board, but how are you going to either kill them on your turn or set up an unbreakable board that's going to matter? You can't do that because you can't OTK with this deck, and now all of your spells are banished, so your board is significantly weaker. And then when it gets back to your opponent's turn, they can just play their turn normally, and they're playing into a significantly weaker end board. The ends just really don't justify the means with either of these, I think. I'll keep them here because they're not the worst cards ever, especially going first. They have like an additional value stopping cards like Troll and Ogre, which can be pretty good. But I think Dimensional Fissure just works better in going first in most cases. Fissure works better, obviously, because it doesn't banish your spells, while still benefiting from that additional benefit from stopping cards like Droll and Ogre, and also forcing out stuff like Fallen of the Virtuous going second. Fortunately, it is really bad into Mitsu and other decks like Doomsday, which I think makes it kind of a fringe side deck option at best. The final main deck win condition I want to go over is also my favorite option for this role, and that is Zaborg the Mega Monarch. If you haven't noticed already, ENNEACRAFT does not use its Hextra deck at all in Engine, basically giving you a ton of flexibility to use those slots for cards that would often require a lot of extra deck space. Zaborg not only wrecks most matchups by just tearing apart their extra deck, but it also has the ability to add several interruptions to your end board to make it a much more layered end board than it normally would be. Some of the most popular targets for Zaborg are the Dirac package with the Astero to be able to summon Dirac Meteor on your opponent's turn up to 3 times for 3 separate board nukes, as well as the Grand Guignol to summon Despia Luluwa Lilith for an additional disruption on your opponent's turn. These are really nice because they're interruptions that can't be outed by evenly matched, making Zaborg one of the deck's best ways to play through even. Another important target for Zaborg is the Paleozoic Link 2 Camber-Raster. This is basically just Salamangreat Baelinks for set cards, giving you additional destruction protection against cards that Tail wouldn't cover, like a Chain Blocked Murakumo or a Cool Tune Mix. Most importantly, it also stops you from nuking your own board with the Dirac Meteor, letting you freely destroy your opponent's stuff while being able to keep your own. Other standard targets for the Zaborg include Garura and Farigite for additional draw power, Entis and other cards like it that give Zaborg additional utility going second, and also the Albion package, which lets you search out Fallen and the Virtuous to add for another additional end board piece. Zaborg, in my option, is the most flexible of the main deck win conditions, and also the least interactable, since the only things that can really stop it are targeting negation like Valor Imperm, and destruction effects like Ghost Ogre and Harmonia, which are easily countered by Pixia and Tail respectively. Leon is also really good insulation for Zaborg, letting you bounce the Zaborg to safety to dodge Valor Imperm and Ogre. Just make sure if you do this, you target the Leon with the Zaborg's effect when you do it, so that if you end up bouncing the Zaborg to dodge these effects, the effect will still resolve by popping the Leon. So the ENNEACRAFT side deck tends to lead more towards the high impact hand trap and board breaker approach for its going second options, simply just due to a lack of space in the deck for non-engine slots. You could theoretically play cards like Dominus Purge in this deck, but is a 1-for-1 hand trap really going to mean that much if you can only play 6 non-engine in the deck? Not really. That's why you'll see a lot of the majority of the popular cards in ENNEACRAFT side deck cards being either blanket continuous hand traps like the Mulch Armies and ironically Duel, or the standard board breakers like Lightning Storm and Evenly Matched. The deck does have a lot of other options that are a little bit more specific to it in particular, so I'm just going to go over a few of them here. One of the most popular side deck options you'll see in ENNEACRAFT is Raw Sphere Mode. This deck obviously can't play traditional Kaijus or Lava Golem because they all special summon themselves, which conflict with the ENNEACRAFT special summon effects. Sphere Mode is the only Kaiju type monster that actually works like a regular tribute summon, so you can play it without shutting off your entire engine. This really helps the deck play into those super wide combo decks that I mentioned earlier, and you could also pair it with cards like Spell Card Soul Exchange for just even more board tributing as well. And one of my favorite side deck options in this deck is actually Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries. Similar to the Zaborg, you just have a ton of flexibility in the extra deck, and if you don't feel like running the Zaborg, then I definitely recommend trying out Cherries inside. Cherries normally isn't that good in most standard decks because you can never fit all the targets that you need with such limited extra deck space. But fortunately, ENNEACRAFT legitimately lets you run 15 targets for this card if you need, basically giving you an option in every matchup that you could possibly imagine. If you want to know more about how good Cherries is in this deck, I do go on a lengthy rant about that in my deck profile about how it was the single best card in my side deck for my regional runs. Sticking with the extra deck tech options, cards like Ultimate Slayer and by extension Phydralis Harmonia as well are also good options for the same reason as Cherries. You could just play an abundance of targets for each of them to cover all kinds of situations that you could find yourself in. Unfortunately, cards like Super Poly and Metaltronus don't work for this because they both require you to special summon, conflicting with your engine the same way as the Kaijus do. So those are all the going second side deck options that I've tried in my time playing the deck, but I'm sure there's plenty more tech options that I haven't seen. So if you know any of the cool techs that you want me to try in the future iterations of this deck, let me know in the comments down below. In terms of side patterns for going second, it's going to be entirely matchup dependent most of the time. You typically only have around like 6 slots that you can side out in the main deck that wouldn't completely cook your consistency, and you're almost always going to side out some number of engine. Remember, as good as a lot of your side cards may be, the deck functions better the more engine you can see in your opening hands, so you don't want to side out too many. Just the ones that are typically least important in that matchup. You typically have like 3 easy side outs going second, being whatever alt win condition you're playing, whether it be Zaborg, the Vanities, Deep Fissure, or whatever you decide to go with. I typically also side out 1 Rebirth going second because it's not really a great draw playing into a board, and drawing multiples might as well just be an auto scoop. Any other side outs from there are just going to be whatever ENNEACRAFT monster is the worst in the matchup. For example, Tail is a pretty mid card into the branded board, so I'll usually side out 1 or 2 going second into that matchup. 1 Exapastia is also a pretty safe side out into pretty much every matchup and still keeps you at around 15 starters, so it won't hurt your consistency too much. For this, I just recommend that you have a general understanding of the decks in the format and what their end boards look like, so you know which ENNEACRAFT cards work the least into all of those matchups. Going first post side, you have even fewer slots to side out, so I usually try to keep my going first side options to a minimum. That being said, there are still a few important ones to knowing about, starting with, of course, Solemn Judgment and by extension Solemn Accusation as well. These are usually the most popular and likely best options for going first in this deck. Obviously, the big thing here is that they're the easiest way you have to stop Evenly from completely ruining your day, but they can also be good to stop things like a Forbidden Droplet or a Mitsurugi Ritual that could otherwise also hurt a lot. The life point cost can hurt your follow-up a little bit, but that's not going to matter if you get cooked by Evenly anyway, so I would rather have the Solemns in that case. Those cards are obviously very good, but I actually do think that there is one option that might be better, and it's easily the spiciest tech that I'll be going over in this video, and that's Exchange. That's right, this card from 2002 is actually has a lot of really cool applications with this deck specifically. Basically, the way it works is that because the entire ENNEACRAFT archetype is made up entirely of pendulum monsters and spell cards, you could just set your entire hand to the field, except the exchange and whatever card is the least valuable in your hand before committing to any of your plays. This allows you to get full hand knowledge from your opponent, and also allows you to take whatever card would threaten you the most, whether that be a Droll, an Evenly, or what have you. And then in return, they just get an ENNEACRAFT card that they can't even use. So it's basically a hand rip for one, and you get their best card. It's not once per turn either, so if you end up drawing another one off of like a Rebirth later in the combo, you can just rip another card from them for free as well. I discovered this card recently, and it's quickly become my new favorite side deck card in this deck. Trust me, you haven't lived until you activate Exchange and snatch up a Droll or an Evenly in your opponent's hand. Of course, this doesn't cover for them like top decking another Evenly, but I feel like the advantage of getting the full hand knowledge and even the possibility of just taking their only starter in their hand is definitely worth it to give this card a shot going forward. This card is actually honestly crazy. Post side going first is similar to going second in that you're usually just siding out the cards that are the worst into the matchup. Leon and Atori are less valuable going first, so you typically can shave a copy of each. I tend to side a copy of the field spell out since it's more difficult for them to banish your one copy going second usually. And the same rules apply as before too. If a name is worse into the particular matchup, like Tail into the branded matchup, you can freely side out one or two of them and keep stuff like Leon or Torian since it's likely to have better applications than those cards. Again, just familiarize yourself with the format a bit and you'll be fine with those things. And that'll do it for the tech options that I've found when playing the deck. Again, if you have any of techs of your own that you'd want me to try, feel free to leave a comment down below. But with that, let's get right into the last part of the guide, the combo tutorial. All right, so the last thing I want to do in this guide is give you guys some tips for playing out your turn with the deck. Because while ENNEACRAFT is a very easy deck to pick up and play, there is a lot of nuance with it, and it really rewards a deep understanding of how the deck functions. There's no real combos with the deck. You're not really aiming for a specific end goal with your opening hand outside of just getting to Rebirth and as many impactful names as possible. There could also be like a small degree of RNG to play around with the random adds, so I figured the best way to go about it is to just shuffle up and drawing a hand and then going through my thought process as I play it out. So let's go ahead and get right into that. I'm just using my my regional list here to draw five cards, and obviously with this deck, a lot of the time your turn is going to be very matchup dependent about what cards you want to prioritize, but I'll give you guys my general thoughts here as we draw out our starting five. We have Atori, Exopacia, Orgia, Sol and Luna, and Leon. So this is actually a really solid hand. This is going to be your primary combo, I would say, if there's any kind of combo in this deck, would be any two, either any two of the level ones or one of the level ones plus release or access to the field spell. This will allow you to get through all four, or this will allow you to get through 4 searches, which will allow your Rebirth to draw 4 and establish the field spell with release and Rebirth in the grave. So starting with this hand, I think the first thing that you typically want to do in this deck, especially going first, is you do want to give yourself as much hand trap protection as possible. So typically what I'll do is I'll start my turn by revealing one of the little names to special out all of the big names here onto our field, just to give us as much protection as possible. Obviously, like Atori Martyr isn't good into the typical hand traps, but stuff like Dominus Purge can occasionally come up, and this can negate that. And then Leon can't really stop an Ash, but like if you do get ashed on one of your scales, you can chain the Leon to bounce the scale back to your hand, and then at least it's not a dead card. So there is still applications for these cards, even if they're not like true hand trap protection. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to start out by placing the Exopacia in the scale here. We'll use the effects to pay 9 and reveal 3 from our deck. And because here we want to play around Droll as much as possible, I don't want to add release right away, because if we get Drolled here, then release is going to be it's just going to place a dead card in the scale that we can't use. So we do want to add a name here just to play around Droll as much as possible. Here I want to add Tremeria. We're obviously playing 3 copies of Tremeria in this list, so we don't have to really reveal all 3 here. We're just going to go ahead and add the Tremeria to our hand. The reason I want to prioritize having Tremeria early is because typically if you're going first blind and you don't know what matchup you're playing into, you want to at least try to prioritize the anti-Mitsurugi board, just because you will just auto lose to Murakumo if you don't set up that exact board. That board can also be good into other decks as well. Like, it's not just only good into the Mitsu matchup. So I do typically want to try and prioritize setting up that board going first, which is why I will prioritize having Termaria first in my hand. So now we're going to go ahead. We're going to go scale up the Termaria. We're going to go ahead. We're going to reveal. My list is playing a 2-2 split for the field spell and the reset. So we'll reveal 2 reset and the one at Neapolis here. We'll just say that our opponent randomly picks the reset here, which then allows us to activate the reset to place the Neapolis field spell in the field zone. And from here, we can use the field spell's effects to targeting our 2 scales to bounce them back to hand. This now frees up our scale to activate yet another searcher. We'll pay another 9. And at this point, we've already gotten past the point where Droll is an issue. So now we can just freely add the release here to ensure that we get it into grave for our follow-up next turn. So here we'll use the release. And again, it's kind of matchup dependent which one you want to place in the scale here. Typically, like, the last one that you want to place in the scale is something that you wouldn't mind adding to your end board, because when you go ahead and you actually draw for the Rebirth at the end of the combo, if you draw into that same name, you won't have to think about whether you want to place it in the scale to use the effect. You'll just be able to add it to your end board for free. So, like, in the case of this hand, the only 2 names that we haven't used are Alizonia and Ocneria. So if we're playing into Branded, for example, I would go ahead and use Release to set the Ocneria, because Ocneria is better into Branded than Alizonia. So if I end up drawing the Ocneria again off of the Rebirth later in the combo, then I wouldn't have to consider placing the Ocneria in scale to use its effect. It would just automatically go to the end. So here we're going to set the Ocneria, and we'll use the effect paying another 900, and we'll reveal 3 copies of Rebirth from our deck and add that to hand. And from here, we'll be able to activate the ENNEACRAFT Rebirth. Again, this is going to be kind of dependent on what you're playing against, or if you're truly scared about the Mitsurugi matchup. If you really want to play around as much as possible, you would only put 3 of these back and keep the Termaria, and then kind of just hope that you draw into both the tail and the Spia. But because we don't have either piece here, we're just going to kind of go all in here and try to dig deep for our alternate win conditions, like Vanity's Fiend or Zabord. So in this case, we're going to shuffle all 4 names back into the deck. We'll shuffle up here, and then we will draw 4 cards off this. And then remember, the only level 1 that we have not used the search effect for so far is Alizonia. So if we draw, there you go, Alizonia right there. We'll be able to get another search. This draw 4 is kind of meh. You really don't want to draw duplicates of spells because they're just dead cards in hand. But honestly, these are perfectly fine because we drew the Alizonia. We can now scale the Alizonia and use the effect paying 900. Your life points will get a little low off this. I mean, we're using 900 5 times. That's 4,500, meaning that you're down to 3,500 before your opponent even plays the card. But it's perfectly fine because you can manage the life points pretty easily. So here we have a Tori and Leon already on the field, and we have another Tori in hand. So I think for this ad, we probably want something like a Spia. I am only playing 2 Spia in my list, so we will have to reveal something else off of this. Probably like a Pixia, I would say. Again, this is matchup dependent, what you're expecting to be playing against. You kind of just want to pick whatever level 9 is best into the matchup in this case. So in this case, we'll say that our opponent randomly picks Spia for us to add to hand. So here we'll be able to add the Spia to our end board, and now we can just start special summoning. So I think here what you want to do, even though it was like a random add and your opponent actually doesn't get to see that you added the Spia, I think it's probably better for you to reveal the Spia here to keep the other cards in your hand unknown, because these cards are complete 0 information for your opponent. where this is at least like a 50-50 shot, basically. So here I would reveal the Spia to then special summon the Exopacia and the Atorimar, and then finally the Spia to the board. And then we can go ahead and set our Sol and Luna, and this is basically going to be our end board. So we have a set Sol and Luna, we have a Spia on the board, a Leon on the board, 2 copies of Atorimar, and an Exopacia on the board. Also, we all have a graveyard full of our spells, so we can use the Rebirth to like flip the Atorimar on a field or the Spia on their opponent's turn, and then reset to reset any effects that we have used already in the turn. But this is a pretty strong end board here. I mean, you have 2 ways to completely Book of Moon your opponent's board with both the Sol and Luna and the Rebirth Grave. You have protection from any kind of chainable effects from both Leon and Spia. And if you're playing into a deck that does some setting, then you have Exopacia, which can get you some more advantage and also possibly trigger something like a Leon or a Spia. And that's going to do it for today's in-depth guide to everything you need to know about ENNEACRAFT. Like I said, I feel like there's so much nuance and skill expression in this deck that can only really be felt by just playing it yourself. So I heavily encourage you, if you haven't already, to go out and build the deck in paper or on Master Duel and give it a shot yourself. I promise the deck is a ton of fun to play. Thank you everybody for sticking around this long into the video. I can definitely say that this is easily the most in-depth video I've made to date, so I really hope you guys enjoyed. As always, if you have any suggestions for things I've missed or recommendations for decks that you want to see future in-depth guides for, be sure to drop them in the comments below and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more of my Yu-Gi-Oh content. But that's it for today. I appreciate you all for watching, and I hope to see you here again soon. My name is JT, and until next time, peace.